And so I need to give you a massive flashing red warning here. What I'm about to say is quite disturbing. There's a lot of uncomfortable language. And if you are triggered or upset by sex assaults and violent assaults, etc., then this is definitely not the show for you tonight.
Working as an elite cleaner is a life few people really understand. When I mention what I do, most picture the glamour. Mansions that stretch endlessly, furniture with designer tags, and views that seem straight out of paradise. And in a way, they're not entirely wrong. I've walked on rugs that cost more than the home I grew up in, and polished chandeliers that looked like pieces of the night sky. But the truth is far from glamorous. No one imagines the dirt I see. Not the kind you can scrub away, but the kind that clings to a person's soul. When the rich and powerful call, they aren't looking for someone to tidy up. They want someone to make their mistakes disappear. They don't need a cleaner. They need someone who can erase evidence, someone who can quietly handle the sins they're too important to carry themselves. I've seen things that would make anyone question what really happens behind those polished doors. Drug residue tucked away in places you wouldn't think to check, as if hidden in plain sight for someone like me to find. Toys and accessories, items so personal and incriminating that the owners would swear they never existed, and sometimes even live animals, but not the kind you'd expect. Exotic creatures left behind like discarded souvenirs from nights that got out of control. There was one time I found a snake coiled up in a bathroom sink. I froze, half expecting it to lash out, but it just stared back, almost like it was as out of place as I felt. I was good at my job. Quiet, efficient, and deliberately uninterested. Curiosity wasn't just discouraged. It was dangerous. My role was simple: erase chaos, restore order, and leave nothing behind but the illusion of normalcy. And for a while, that was enough. But after years of cleaning up the kind of messes no one talks about, you start to feel the weight of it all. Every mess has a story. Sometimes it's loud, broken glass and overturned furniture that tell of rage or fear. Other times it's subtle, like the faint imprint of a wine glass on a table that was wiped clean too quickly. But the stories stick to you, whether you want them to or not, like the smell of stale alcohol that lingers in a room no matter how many windows you open. But no amount of experience prepared me for that call. It was supposed to be just another job, a special cleaning at a sprawling Beverly Hills mansion owned by one of the most influential figures in entertainment. My boss's tone was different that day, colder, sharper. "This is confidential. No questions, no curiosity. Just do the work." Something inside me hesitated. I don't know if it was instinct or fear, but for the first time in years, I considered saying no. I should have. But the payoff was too good to walk away from. It was one of those offers that seemed too big, too urgent, like they wanted to buy your silence before you even arrived. I didn't realize then that I wasn't just walking into a job. I was walking into a secret I was never meant to uncover. Getting a call to clean in Beverly Hills wasn't unusual for me. I'd worked in homes that felt more like museums, with every surface gleaming under the weight of unimaginable wealth. But this job felt different from the moment the phone rang. My boss rarely called me directly. He preferred to stay out of the details. This time, though, he handled it himself, speaking in short, clipped sentences, as if he didn't want to say too much. "We have an emergency," he said. "You'll be working in a basement. No questions asked. Just do the work." There was something in his voice, a hesitation, almost like he was trying to warn me without breaking protocol. I had no idea what I was walking into. The house in question belonged to none other than Diddy, one of the most recognizable icons in entertainment. His name carried weight in every corner of the industry, and I'd heard plenty of stories about his infamous parties. They were said to be the kind of events where excess was the rule, where limits simply didn't exist. As I pulled up to the mansion, I wasn't surprised to find a scene straight out of those stories. Broken bottles scattered across the polished floor, abandoned glasses balanced on the edges of expensive furniture, and an overpowering smell of cigarettes mixed with something much stronger hanging in the air. The mansion itself was breathtaking, the kind of place you'd see in a magazine or a music video. Marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting the glow of massive chandeliers that lit up the space like daylight. The walls were adorned with modern art, pieces that were probably worth more than most people's homes. Everything about the place screamed luxury, yet there was something about it that made me uneasy. Beneath all the grandeur, there was a tension, a subtle feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything you could see, but you could feel it, like the house itself was keeping secrets. I was greeted by the team leader, someone I'd worked with before. Usually he was calm and composed, but today he looked nervous. He barely made eye contact as he gestured toward a staircase off the main room. "You'll handle the basement," he said quickly, like he was trying to get the words out without thinking too much about them. The basement. I've learned over the years that when someone sends you to the basement, it's never for anything good. Basements are where people put the things they don't want anyone to see. The messes that are too big, too dark, or too incriminating for the light of day. They're where secrets live, and no one calls someone like me unless they want those secrets gone. As I stood at the top of the staircase staring down into the shadowy depths, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was waiting for me down there wasn't something I'd ever forget. But this was the job, and jobs like these came with rules, no questions, no hesitation, and no turning back. As I descended the staircase, the air shifted around me. It wasn't just cooler. It felt heavier, damp, almost stale, like it had been locked away for years. Every step echoed faintly in the enclosed space, amplifying the growing unease in my chest. I'd done my share of special jobs before, and they always carried more weight than just cleaning up spilled drinks or fixing furniture. This wasn't about tidying up after a wild night. Whatever waited for me down there wasn't just a mess. It was something that would sink its claws into my mind and stay with me forever. When I reached the bottom, the feeling hit me like a wave. A shiver ran up my spine, not from the cold, but from the oppressive atmosphere. The basement was a stark contrast to the extravagant mansion above. Gone were the marble floors and the glittering chandeliers. Down here, the walls were dark, the ceiling uncomfortably low, and the fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting strange, fleeting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if the space itself held on to the secrets whispered within its walls. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't just a storage area or some forgotten utility room. No, this place was designed for something else entirely. The plush, soundproof walls, the dim lighting, and the faint trace of expensive cigars lingering in the air told me all I needed to know. This was a space meant for private parties, the kind that no one wanted the world to know about. The unsettling contrast between the luxury upstairs and the suffocating secrecy of the basement was enough to make my stomach twist. Whatever had happened down here wasn't meant to see the light of day, and I was the one tasked with making sure it stayed that way. In the center of the basement, under the dim, flickering light, was a small stage. Metal rods gleamed coldly, reflecting what little light reached them, their polished surfaces eerily out of place amidst the surrounding chaos. The floor told its own story, heel marks dragged through sticky patches, drink stains overlapping each other, and something darker, thicker, that clung to my shoes with every step, leaving a faint, unpleasant resistance as I moved. To one side, a bar stretched along the wall, but unlike the pristine, high-end bars upstairs, this one looked like it had weathered something far more sinister. Half-full bottles sat abandoned, some toppled over, spilling yellowish liquid into shallow puddles that shimmered in the dim light. The counter wasn't clean either. Thin lines and scattered traces of white powder lingered on its surface, unmistakable signs of indulgence. It felt like a silent confession of the night's debauchery, a chaotic testament to excess and recklessness. The furniture told an even darker tale. Armchairs with torn fabric sat slumped at odd angles. Sofas, their cushions stained and sunken, bore the weight of stories better left untold. In the corner, a broken chair stood as if frozen in time, its splintered wood jagged and raw, almost like a piece of evidence. It didn't take much imagination to picture someone being thrown against it. This wasn't just the dirt and grime left behind by a wild party. It was the aftermath of something violent, something that couldn't be explained away with laughter and excuses. Yet the most unnerving part wasn't the mess or the destruction. It was the silence. It pressed down on me like a weight, amplifying the tension in the room. The chaotic state of the space seemed frozen in time, yet the oppressive quiet made it feel alive in a way that sent chills through me. Every sound I made, a soft squeak of my shoe, the dull scrape of my cloth across a table, echoed back endlessly, as if the walls themselves were mocking me. It felt like the basement was holding its breath, waiting for something. Or someone. As I cleaned, the unsettling sensation of being watched began to crawl over me. It wasn't the kind of unease you get when you catch someone staring from across a room. No, this was deeper, harder to pinpoint, like the walls themselves had eyes. The basement felt alive in a way that made my skin prickle, every shadow a little too dark, every corner too quiet. I shook the feeling off, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. This wasn't the time to let my imagination run wild. Then I noticed it, something strange behind the bar. One of the wooden panels didn't line up with the rest. It was subtle, almost invisible. But my trained eye caught it. My hand hesitated as I ran the cloth over the surface, and that's when I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible click. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. Slowly, I pressed my hand against the panel, and it slid aside with an unsettling smoothness, as if it had been waiting for someone to discover it. Behind it was a heavy trapdoor, its rusty hinges and weathered lock standing out starkly against the sleek design of the basement. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the door, my instincts screaming at me to stop, to push the panel back and pretend I hadn't seen it, but I didn't. Whether it was curiosity, adrenaline, or sheer stupidity, I found myself crouching down, my fingers trembling as they gripped the latch. With a deep breath, I pulled. The sound of the rusty hinges creaking open was deafening in the oppressive silence of the basement. It echoed like a warning, cutting through the quiet and settling into my chest like a weight. The door opened slowly, revealing an iron staircase spiraling down into blackness. The smell hit me before I could process what I was looking at. A dense, suffocating mix of mold, rust, and something else. Something foul, acrid, and entirely unnatural. I reached for my flashlight, my fingers fumbling slightly as I clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the staircase. But no matter how far I aimed it, the light seemed to be swallowed whole, as if the staircase had no end. The blackness below felt alive, pulling me in with a quiet, ominous hum. My breath quickened, and for a brief moment, I considered walking away. But then, almost as if drawn by an unseen force, I placed my foot on the first step. Fighting back a rising sense of panic, I began my descent. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound amplified in the confined space, echoing endlessly into the darkness below. The cold metal of the stairs bit through the soles of my shoes, grounding me in the reality of what I was doing. The air thickened with every step, growing more oppressive, as though it didn't want me to continue. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the rail tightly as my mind churned with possibilities. I tried to convince myself this was nothing more than an old storage room, forgotten and unused. But I knew better. The uneasy pull in my gut told me this was something else entirely. When I reached the bottom, the silence I'd grown accustomed to was replaced by a low, faint hum. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the air, like distant electricity coursing through unseen wires. I swung my flashlight around, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a narrow tunnel ahead. The walls were rough concrete, damp and cold, but what drew my attention were the scratches. At first I thought they were random marks from wear and tear, but the closer I looked, the more deliberate they seemed. Some were shallow, thin, like they'd been made by human fingernails. But others were wide, deep, and jagged. The kind of marks that made my skin crawl as I wondered what could have made them. My throat tightened as I traced the scratches with the flashlight, my mind racing to suppress the worst possibilities. The smell hit me harder now, almost overwhelming. It was more than just mold and rust. Beneath those familiar scents was something far more sinister, a sharp, sickening stench that reminded me of rotting meat. I had to steady myself against the wall for a moment, fighting the urge to gag. The tunnel stretched for what felt like forever, each step accompanied by the unsettling hum that grew louder the farther I went. Then, up ahead, the passage split into two directions. To the left was nothing but pure, suffocating darkness. My flashlight couldn't penetrate it, as if the void swallowed the light whole. But to the right, something more tangible caught my attention, a large, rusty metal door. The door loomed at the end of the tunnel, its surface covered in streaks of dark stains that had long since dried, leaving brittle trails that led to the floor. Near the top of the door was a small, circular window, just large enough to peer through, though what lay beyond it was shrouded in shadow. My legs felt frozen, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. Whatever was behind that door wasn't meant to be found, not by me, not by anyone. But I couldn't stop. Something stronger than fear pulled me forward, compelling me to press on, to find out what waited behind that rusted steel barrier. Each step towards it felt heavier, like I was crossing some invisible threshold I could never return from. Fighting the urge to run, I reached the door, my hand trembling as it hovered over the corroded, icy doorknob. My distorted reflection in the circular window stared back at me, warped and eerie under the dim light. It was as if the glass itself wanted to warn me, to tell me this wasn't a place I was meant to enter. But something deeper than curiosity pulled at me, a compulsion I couldn't shake. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I summoned every ounce of courage I had and pushed the door open. The deafening creak of metal seemed to tear through the silence, echoing down the tunnel like a scream. What lay beyond the door made my stomach twist and drop like a stone. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single dim bulb swinging above, was an industrial freezer. Its steel surface was scratched and stained, standing as the grim centerpiece of the room. Around it, steel shelves lined the walls, each stacked with neat rows of boxes and vacuum-sealed bags. It was the labels that caught my eye first. They weren't brands or inventory numbers. They were names, full names, written hastily in a shaky, irregular script. My breath caught as I scanned the shelves, the names staring back at me like silent accusations. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, but nothing fit. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I reached out and grabbed one of the bags. The plastic felt cold and slick in my hand, damp with condensation. When I held it up to the weak light above, my stomach churned. The contents weren't ordinary meat. The texture was all wrong, dark red marbled with yellowish gray, veined with something unmistakably organic, something disturbingly human. My grip faltered, and for a moment, I thought I might drop it. My hands shook as I shoved the bag back onto the shelf, desperately trying to calm my racing thoughts. My flashlight swept across the room, catching something on the wall that made my heart lurch. A corkboard hung crookedly, cluttered with photographs pinned haphazardly. The faces in the photos sent chills down my spine. Politicians, celebrities, businessmen, people who graced headlines and magazine covers. But the poses were wrong. Their expressions were vacant, their eyes glassy and devoid of life, as if they were mannequins or something worse. Many of the photos were smudged with dark stains, the edges curling as if they had been handled with bloody hands. My light moved lower, catching the corner of the board where a yellowed sheet of paper hung. Scrawled across it in thick, uneven strokes was a chilling message: invitation only. I stood frozen, the weight of what I'd stumbled into crashing down on me. This wasn't just a secret. This was something monstrous, something that shouldn't exist, and I was standing in the middle of it. I backed away from the freezer, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Every instinct told me to leave, to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. But something deeper, curiosity, or maybe a twisted sense of obligation, compelled me to take one more step forward. My trembling hand reached for the freezer's latch. It resisted at first, as if it were guarding its secrets, but I forced it open. The sound was sharp and metallic, a scream that seemed to echo through the room. Inside, more vacuum-sealed bags were stacked neatly, each one labeled with a name. Names I recognized, names I wish I hadn't. My stomach churned as I stared at the bags, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was something worse, something I couldn't begin to process. My hands shook uncontrollably as I shut the freezer, the latch clicking back into place like it was sealing a tomb. A faint creaking sound came from behind me. My heart stopped. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness, but the room was empty. Or so it seemed. The feeling of being watched was unbearable now, like invisible eyes were locked onto my every move. The air felt heavier, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. I needed to leave. I stumbled back toward the tunnel, my steps unsteady but quick. The smell grew worse with each step, the stench of decay and rot clinging to me like a second skin. The darkness twisted and shifted, shadows forming shapes that defied logic, shapes I didn't want to understand. My flashlight flickered, and for a horrifying moment, I was plunged into total blackness. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me in their silence. When I reached the iron staircase, I didn't pause to catch my breath. I climbed as fast as I could, each step groaning under my weight, as if the darkness below was trying to drag me back down. My legs burned, my hands slipped on the cold metal, but I didn't stop until I burst back into the basement above. The light was blinding, harsh and unnatural after the oppressive darkness. It didn't feel like safety, though. It felt like I had dragged something with me, like the basement's presence was clinging to me, refusing to let go. I moved through the rest of the basement mechanically, scrubbing and cleaning without thought, just going through the motions. My mind was numb, my body on autopilot. All I wanted was to get out. As I stepped outside the mansion, I noticed several blue vans parked in the driveway. Uniformed men were unloading stacks of pizza boxes, their movements silent and unsettlingly synchronized. They didn't talk, didn't even glance at me. Their mechanical precision sent a chill down my spine. Something about it felt profoundly wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. All I wanted was to leave, to get as far away as possible and never look back. Driving away, I glanced back at the mansion, its glowing lights cutting through the night like nothing had ever happened. To anyone else, it was just another sprawling Beverly Hills estate. But I knew the truth. That place wasn't just hiding wealth and power. It was hiding something far darker, something that could never be explained or justified. The further I drove, the heavier the air felt, as though I hadn't truly left it behind. In the days that followed, paranoia gripped me like a vice. I began noticing black SUVs parked near my home, engines idling but never approaching. Anonymous calls came at odd hours, the voice on the other end silent, a subtle reminder of what I had seen, and the price of curiosity. it became painfully clear that I had stumbled into something far bigger than myself, something untouchable, unspoken, and cloaked in a darkness I couldn't begin to understand. But it wasn't just the threats that haunted me. The tunnels refused to leave my thoughts, their suffocating presence invading my dreams. I'd see the symbols etched into the concrete walls, ancient designs that seemed to move, pulsating with a sinister energy even as I stared at them. The room with the cages lingered in my mind too. The claw marks, the dark stains beneath them, the faint metallic tang of iron. It all haunted me like an unfinished nightmare. And the robes, those pristine white robes, stained only where they had brushed against the bars, left questions in my mind that I didn't want answers to. But worst of all was the freezer. I could still feel its cold metal latch against my fingers, still see the names scrawled on the bags, the lifeless photographs pinned to the corkboard, the smudged faces staring back at me, and the scratches, deep, desperate marks carved into the inside of the door. Those would stay with me forever. Each image replayed itself in my head, over and over, like a broken reel I couldn't shut off. Even in my own home, I wasn't safe. A creak in the floorboards, a faint hum of electricity in the dead of night. It all sent chills through me, dragging me back to that dark basement. The world I once thought I knew now felt paper-thin, as if behind every polished surface was a darkness just waiting to be revealed. I carried the weight of what I'd seen everywhere I went, a gnawing presence that I couldn't shake. And still those black SUVs loitered at the edge of my vision, always just out of reach, their presence a quiet reminder that I had crossed a line. The silent phone calls never stopped either, as though someone was reminding me they were always listening. Even when there was nothing but static on the other end, I could feel the unspoken message. I wasn't free. So now I'm left with a choice. Sharing this story might be the biggest mistake I'll ever make, or it could be the only way to break free from the shadows that still follow me. Perhaps the only way to escape is to bring it into the light. Or maybe, by telling this, I've only opened the door wider, inviting the nightmare to swallow me whole. Either way, it's too late now. The story is out there, and so am I.